My name is Gabe Howard, and I am the host of the Psych Central Podcast on PsyCentralcom. And, I thought my best career move was to bring, I don't know, John, what are you, my boss partner? I'm going to go with boss partner.
Boss partner,
yeah! And and bring him on the show. So the Psych Central Podcast, it comes out every Thursday. You can find it over on PsyCentral.com/show or your favorite podcast player. Obviously, I've stuck the link right there because, hey, we got to make money somehow. But we're doing kind of a series here on the Facebook Lives where we want to talk about what we think that mental health advocacy is going to look like after the pandemic. We're sort of at the stage now where we're hearing what's the new normal. There's a lot of that trending, and what are things going to look like when it's over. We're starting to think past the global pandemic, and we're mental health people. So obviously, I wanted to talk about what we think mental health advocacy is going to look like, what blogging about mental health is going to look like. I mean, hell, what are podcasts about mental health going to look like? So we wanted to engage all of you. I wanted to bring John on because John has lots of very, very cool opinions. But all you need to know is ask any question that you want in the comments. We will try to get to as many of them as you can, or disagree with us in the comments. Just you pretty much do whatever you want in the comments. Make sense, John? Y'all good?
Hey, yeah, happy to be here with you today, Gabe. Let's do this.
All right. Well, I am very excited to have you here. All right. The first question that I want to ask you, just sort of straight out of the gate, is do you think that the pandemic is changing mental health advocacy, or do you think this is just much ado about nothing?
I mean, yeah, I think it's definitely going to change, right? Because the economy has changed, people's situations have changed. And so I think you're going to see an impact on state budgets, which is going to trickle down to services available to people with mental illness and mental health concerns. And all that trickling down basically means that there'll probably be less money going around and maybe less resources and support for people who do mental health advocacy. So I actually think the pandemic is going to make mental health advocacy more of a challenge for people, the people who do it, and then they're going to have to find other ways of doing it that can also help people, but maybe not with the traditional sources of support that they've gotten in the past.
Maybe our listeners don't or viewers don't know this, but a lot of mental health advocacy is supported by government grants. And I only bring this up because the government just spent, $1.6 trillion. And you alluded to the fact that there may be less money. I want to ask a question. In your opinion, how can we fight this? How can we make the government understand that mental health impacts everybody and that maybe we're not such an easy budget cut after all?
I think in the short term, it's going to be challenging, right? Because governments have different priorities during the time of pandemic and during a time of economic upheaval. And they're looking out for basically all of their citizens, and people that are advocating for certain health conditions, or in our case, mental health conditions. They don't take as high a priority during a time of pandemic, during a time of economic upheaval. So I think short term, it might be a good time to regroup and get together a plan as to how to address this in the 2021, 2022, time frame, because state governments are going to be strapped. There's just no two ways about it. And unless the federal government steps up and devotes more money to state governments, to mental health programs specifically, to help combat this, and they've done a little bit of that. Don't get me wrong. There has been some money set aside for the mental health challenges that we're facing, but I think it's, at the end of the day, I think it's probably like a drop of water in an ocean in terms of the resources that have been devoted to it so far.
Obviously, but before the whole pandemic, before the quarantine, before COVID-19, before anybody had ever heard of this, mental health advocates were working to find more resources, more beds, more understanding, more resources, whether that be money, hospitals, doctors, et cetera. It sounds like one of the advocacy points is to continue this, just understand that it is now more dire, and hopefully we can get more people to help us. And that sort of leads into the next question I have. More people seem to be discussing anxiety and depression on social media. I'm looking for trends on Google social media, and it seems like depression and anxiety is a mental health issue that has just sort of exploded in people wanting to know about it. Do you think this will help people be more receptive to more serious issues like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and psychosis?
I think, sure. I mean, anything that forwards the conversation to allow us to have these discussions, anything about mental health issues is good, right? Because people are talking about depression, people are talking about anxiety, and these are actually mental disorders unto themselves. And I think maybe this is the first time a lot of people's eyes have been opened up to the fact that mental disorders and mental health concerns don't just happen to other people. They can happen to our own family. They can happen to our own family members and friends who are going through some really difficult and challenging times right now. So I think it's a tragedy what we've all gone through in the past few months. And that I would take back in a heartbeat if we could, bring back some of those 110,000 people that we've lost already. But if, on the other hand, we are having more open conversations about mental health issues, I think, that might be the silver lining.
I tend to agree with you that all conversations are valuable, even when people disagree with me or disagree with articles that I read on PsyCentral.com. When I see people arguing about a point respectfully debating something, I think that there is a lot of value in that, because so often we're just not part of the conversation at all. I know this is really just the same question in maybe a slightly different way, but what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on the idea that maybe for the first time we're starting to really consider the idea that anxiety and schizophrenia for a layperson is on the same spectrum? Because before, the people with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or psychosis, those were the mentally ill people, those were the crazy people, those were the ones we didn't want to pay attention to. But, oh, you're anxious or a little depressed? Well, take a mental health day. That's very valuable. And we've had real trouble understanding that it's really just part of the same ship. Do you think this will correct that?
Maybe. I mean, there are some people there, some advocates who are very committed to differentiating between different types of mental illness, as though that's important. I think it actually kind of sets back our discussions a little bit when people make these kind of arbitrary distinctions between this is a really serious disorder, and this is something that requires a lot more attention and money, and this disorder over here is not so bad, and you guys don't have it nearly. You got plenty of resources. We shouldn't be talking about this other disorder. I think we're all part of the same big family, and we should be having conversations around how to help all disorders, that we shouldn't discriminate or show bias toward a particular type of disorder just because it's more serious or less serious. I think that's just a road that infuriates the outside world when they hear these conversations, because they're like, I thought mental illness was all serious. I didn't realize that some people inside the mental illness advocacy world don't take attention deficit disorder, for instance, all that seriously. So,
I obviously agree with you. I understand the idea about raising awareness and resources and understanding about one specific disorder. Speaking in a very biased way, I live with bipolar disorder, and it's not an accident that I started my career only talking about bipolar disorder and anxiety disorder, because those are the two things that impact Gabe the most, and that's what I knew the most about. But I tend to agree with you. I absolutely agree with you that I never said, hey, I want all the funding from all the other mental illnesses to go to my illnesses because I'm sicker than you. And I do see that a lot. My next question is, and again, it's really tough. There's a big difference between a mental health issue and a serious and persistent mental illness. Do you think that the pandemic is going to free up resources so that people finally understand that anybody can have a mental health issue and then perhaps take away from serious and persistent mental illness, which would be a concern because we want all things funded? Or do you think that's just not a concern and it's kind of a straw man argument?
Typically, the money set aside for serious mental illness programs and whatnot, I mean, that's done a long time ahead of time. And while some of that money could be diverted to other programs, it's usually spelled out in the law that it basically can't be very easily diverted to other types of mental health educational programs or treatment programs. So I don't think it's as big a concern as maybe some people feel. I do worry about not the current money, but I do worry about maybe future monies, like for the 2021 budget, for the 2022 budget. You do start wondering, like, are people going to re-examine the priorities of the mandates for different federal agencies, for state block grants, things of that nature, and reprioritize the way that they decide how to dole out that money. I think we've moved toward better funding the serious and persistent mental illness and chronic mental illness. I don't see that kind of being undone just because of the pandemic. I think the momentum on that and the focus on those kinds of concerns will continue to be a major the way it is. Like, I don't think that's going to change significantly.
That leads me right into my next question. Thank you for setting me up. I swear that we did not rehearse this, but do you think when this is all over, and I know people are starting to think that it's over now, but we're months away from getting back to where we were this time last summer. I mean, we have a whole summer of things canceled. So I think it's very important to understand that, maybe this, think about this in terms of January or even next summer. But do you think things are going to go back to completely normal and stay the same? Or is there like another option that nobody is discussing that maybe we should be aware of?
I think a lot of people are discussing it. Maybe you're not hearing it. It's a new normal, right? We're not going back to the way things were. We never will. People who think that that's going to be what's going to happen, the inevitable outcome of the pandemic, I think don't realize how much we have understood about how a virus like this can be transmitted, and to understanding the safe precautions that people can take to ensure that they're not passing it along, because so many people, again, they don't realize you can be asymptomatic and be passing the virus along. So I think some things, things will eventually get back to that new normal, perhaps a year from now, sporting events, for instance. But I wouldn't be surprised to see things like wearing a mask in public becoming, if not the standard as it is in many Southeast countries, to find it that it's a choice that people can make. And if that makes a person feel safer in public, you're probably going to see a lot more mask wearing even after the pandemic is supposedly over. So.
It's interesting you brought up this is how it's done in other countries. So it only feels weird to us, of course, because it's new, and then eventually it will just become what we do. And then before you know it, it's John, we're of the age where we remember life before the internet and we remember life after the internet. But the internet's been around long enough that there are adults in my life in the workplace that just have no concept of life without the internet. Because it's normal to them. Do you think that this is what's going to happen here, that 15 years from now, people are just going to put on a mask because they have a cold, and when you ask them why they're doing that, they're going to say, because that's what you do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think the societal norms can change in a heartbeat. It takes a few years generally, but I don't see any reason why we couldn't adapt to wearing face masks out in areas out in the public and when we go out, or in times where there's a high risk of being in close quarters with people, such as at a concert or a sporting event. And if it affords everybody protection, why not do it? I mean, other societies have grappled with this for all of 10 seconds and come to the conclusion that from a public health perspective, this makes perfect sense. And if it can help stop the spread of a future pandemic, why not do it? It's such a simple, easy thing to do, and to change your behavior and incorporate into your daily life.
I could not agree more. Listen up, everybody. We're about the halfway point of the show. You can ask any questions that you want. Do you think Doc John's got it right? Agree with him. You think he's got it wrong? Disagree with him. In the comment section, type whatever you want. Try to keep it short so we can display it on the screen. But ask your questions in the comment section, and we will address them. John, are you excited to get to the next one?
Yeah, you bet. Let's do it.
Hey. So canceling educational events, for example, like conferences, has an impact, but people aren't really talking about the impact of canceling all these educational events, but we did them for a reason. Any thoughts on what that impact might be of a year without continuing education?
Well, as we're seeing with restaurants, obviously there's an economic impact to the companies that and the organizations that sponsor and organize these conferences. So some of those companies and organizations may no longer be around to host a future conference. We're also learning that people can adapt pretty easily. We've all gone online. We've all learned how to have a Zoom meeting, and you see a lot of conferences trying out to do virtual conferences. Obviously, it doesn't have that same feel. It doesn't have the social, the networking component that so many people go to conferences for. But the educational component, one of the main reasons for having a conference, can still be there. And whether you do it through a virtual conference or you just do it through different online platforms to share, more information with people, I think people are adapting. They're learning new tools. They're learning new ways of doing these things, and I think we'll see conferences come back, but they may be smaller. They may be more focused on helping really to reinforce the why people go to conferences. Right? It's not just for the didactic sitting in a course and learning something new from a presentation, because as we're learning, you can do that online. You can do that in a webinar. You can do that in a Zoom meeting. So maybe focusing more on the interpersonal aspects of it, the networking aspects of it, and helping to enable those better. But yeah, I think conferences will come back. I think people enjoy them too much as an opportunity to learn in a different kind of environment. So.
John, one of the things that has surprised me in all of this that has come up, and I think this is going to be a big change personally, is telehealth. And speaking purely in mental health terms, when telehealth first came out, I was like, no, people aren't getting the care that they need now. There's too much about paying attention to people's body language. People don't feel. I just want to go on record as saying that I was not a really big fan of telehealth, especially in the case of serious and persistent mental illness. But when it was all there was, because everything was closed and nobody, obviously if somebody needs a prescription filled or needs help and their options are not to get it or telehealth, I've been surprised, sincerely, at how helpful telehealth has been in getting people care. Is that something that you think will stick around? Because the jury was kind of out on it before this whole pandemic thing happened. Some practitioners very much believed in it, and other practitioners felt that it was just a money-making tactic. What are your thoughts on how telehealth is going to move forward now?
I think, when you're not given the choice, right, that you have to close your offices, you can't see patients face to face, suddenly all those tools that seemed ridiculous and expensive and over the top have a really good use, that they keep people safe during a pandemic. And that, that functionality of a telehealth visit, a virtual visit, isn't going away. And some people are simply going to embrace it more as a component of their everyday practice. So they'll see some people face to face, they'll see some people over video conferencing, they'll do other, messaging. I think it opens up people to understand that you can do treatment in so many ways that you hadn't even thought about. That it doesn't have to be this, face-to-face thing that we do a set period of time once a week, which is fine. But it also means that you have to, find the schedule. Your schedules have to mesh up, and you get charged a lot for it. You could be messaging a therapist, 5 times a week, and feel a greater connection and feel like you're getting more out of the work you're doing with that therapist with a online therapy platform that therapists are only now beginning to understand, like, hey, this can be really beneficial for client outcomes, for patient outcomes. So yeah, definitely telehealth is not going away, and the pandemic has shown us the strengths of the platform that people, I think, discounted a little bit before the pandemic.
I was one of those people, John. I understood it in terms of, like, basic, and I'm doing the thing that you talked about earlier, where I'm judging, mental health issues, but I understood it for basic mental health. And we should point out that the Psych Central podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp.com. You can get 1 week free at BetterHelp.com/PsyCentral. So I was very familiar with it, and I did see a lot of potential, and I personally have known people who are helped by it. But I also think all the way back in 2003 when I told a therapist whatever it was I thought they wanted to hear, because I was terrified of them. Of course, I was very, very sick. And one of the ways that they figured out that I was lying is I just had all these tells. I'm fine, but I'd be fidgeting 1,000 miles an hour. I'd be rocking back and forth. There'd just be all of these little things that they picked up on. I would show up to the appointment not dressed. Do you think that it sounds to me like you're sort of maybe advocating a hybrid method? I don't want to speak for you. I just kind of want to address those were the concerns before the pandemic, that maybe those things would be missed over Zoom or telephone.
Yeah. So what most people probably don't appreciate is the fact that online therapy and the use of the internet as a way of conducting psychotherapy has been around we're in our 3rd decade of practice with telehealth for psychotherapy.
Wow.
So this is not a new thing, believe it or not. It's been around since the mid 1990s. And we've just see this surge of interest in it because of the pandemic, because people had no choice. This is the way we're going to do our visit if you want to continue seeing me. And therapists didn't have a choice, and a lot of clients and patients didn't have a choice. So I think we have a ton of research on this modality. We know it works, whether you're doing it through video conferencing like this, or you're doing it through messaging, through a secure messaging platform. It takes kind of the form of like text messaging or basically secure email. So back and forth with your therapist, you can get a lot of good therapeutic work done using one of these platforms.
I cannot agree with you more. And as somebody who needed to use telehealth because of the pandemic, I was really surprised at the options. And I think it's only getting more involved. So I guess I can learn, grow, and change, John. I was unaware of that until just this
Well,
moment.
that's great, Gabe. I mean, that's what life is all about, right?
Yeah.
Because if you kind of stay in your lane and stay in your place, you're not really moving forward, right? Like,
Fair statement. One of the questions that came up in the comment section is, do different age groups find it easier to adapt to changes? Now, I'm going to go ahead and answer that question and say, yes, young people are going to be more malleable than the older generation. That said, since this is impacting literally everyone, there's not a lot of, usually things impact, different age groups or social, they, one little piece at a time, not everybody all at once. So mental health wise, how do we provide for everybody? Because we can't just provide mental health for young people because we're leaving out, I hate to say old people, but, senior citizens or middle-aged, or what do you think is going to happen in order to provide it? Because this is a trauma. The whole world has gone through a trauma.
Yeah. So what's happened with seniors is that a lot of them have just stopped engaging in the, in their treatments or in their appointments that they might see with people, because some of them are not technology savvy. For instance, my mom wants nothing to do with technology. Even telephones are not her favorite thing to use. But she uses a telephone, so they don't engage in this crazy video conferencing platform, but they'll engage in a telephonic appointment call that you can do therapy, you can do doctor's checkups and things over the telephone. Again, not ideal, but for short term use, a few weeks here or a few months there, it's perfectly fine. You have to try and reach people where they are, the comfort level that they're at, and that means sometimes thinking outside the box. So thinking about ways that you can do social distancing in a doctor's office that was never set up for social distancing, or a therapy office that was never set up for it. Most therapists' offices are actually usually large enough where you can sit. You can arrange the chairs so there's 6 or 7 feet apart from each other, and you can both agree to wear masks, and that keeps you safe during that session. So it's not rocket science, but you do have to put some thought into it and try and reach people at where they are and the comfort levels that they're at.
I think that it's going to be very interesting to see how we move forward in terms of our mental health. And I know we're almost out of time, and this is my last question for you, unless of course I have a follow-up question. But PsychCentral.com has been around for 25 years. We're celebrating 25 years. Yay!
Woo!
And you are the founder. You're the editor-in-chief. You've been the editor-in-chief of a mental health website for literally a quarter of a century. And I'm assuming this is your first.
When you put it like that, you make me feel a little on the old side there.
I'm not trying to make you feel old. I'm just trying to impress that 25 years is an awful lot of data. And now I know that this is your first global pandemic, but you've seen a lot of.
Oh, I was there in the 1918 pandemic. I'm not old.
PsychCentral.com was around before Google.
We were. Yeah, that part is true.
But the specific question, that 25 years is a lot of data, and you of course are a doctor, you understand data, you understand research. Have you noticed any differences in terms of what people are searching for, or how are people interfacing with mental health information in the age of the pandemic?
Yeah, unfortunately, one of our most popular resources actually took it really went up in traffic. It really, and I say unfortunate because it's a resource devoted to understanding grief, and to see a grief resource really take off during the time of a pandemic makes you understand in a very different way how much the pandemic is impacting people. Not just from the people who've died, but the people who've gotten sick, the people who didn't know whether they were going to live, the relationships that have broken up due to being stay-at-home orders, due to loss of jobs. There's a lot of feelings of loss, a lot of feelings of grief right now, and it breaks my heart to see that resource doing the best in traffic, because it's the last resource I would expect for people to be looking at and reading about on the website during this time. We've also seen a lot of use of the resources that we have devoted to depression and anxiety, not surprising, a lot related to health and improvement of relationships. And also the resources that we have about jobs and job loss, not surprising that they've also seen an increase in traffic.
I know that Psych Central also has tons of forums for people to seek help, and I want to mention those, one, to piggyback onto telehealth, and two, because it's a completely free resource.
Yep.
Just go over to PsyCentral.com and just tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, here, look, 25 years ago, if you went on the internet and you were looking for mental health resources, you couldn't get a lot done. Like, you couldn't learn a whole bunch about, how do I do a deep breathing relaxation technique? Now you can go online, you can go on YouTube, you can go on our website, and you can get the step-by-step instructions on how to do deep breathing exercises in the comfort of your own home, never talking to a professional. There's so many self-help resources available on the internet, not just on our website. And one of those, of course, are online support groups that are peer-led. And they are a great resource because they give you that emotional support, that little kick in the pants that you might need from time to time, to share with other people, to talk about your emotional reactions to things, and to work out some of the troubles that you're experiencing, and getting sort of feedback on, hey, am I looking at the situation accurately? What advice do you have? Therapists don't give a lot of advice, but that's the nice thing about support groups, is that people feel free to give as much advice as they want. And the great part about it is you can take it and leave it. Like, if you see some advice you don't agree with, you're just like, oh, that's not going to work for me. But if you see some advice that you're like, oh, wow, I never considered it from that point of view, I'm going to rethink about that situation. And wow, I'm glad I had that feedback. So I love our online support groups only because they've been around since 2001. So they're 19 years old.
Wow.
And they are just full of supportive, helpful people looking to help one another out. And of course, it costs nothing. So why not give it a try?
Yeah, and I like what you said there, John. I always tell people in support groups, it's like a buffet. Take what you want and leave the rest.
Yeah.
And if you don't like something on a buffet, you don't attack it. I hate you, lettuce. No, you just pass it by.
Yes.
And I think that's a really good way to look at stuff like that, because it is easy to be like, that's horrible advice. Yeah, but salad is horrible on a buffet. I don't care what anybody says. John, thank you so much for being here. Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners? I say listener, you can tell that I'm a podcast host. For our viewers.
Yeah. Hey, look, everybody knows these are trying times, and with the protests in the past week for Black Lives Matter, we stand together in solidarity with all of our African American friends and family. I really think this is a time where the country needs to take a long, hard look at these issues, and it's time to heal. It's time to find solutions to these ongoing problems of overreach by police, by senseless violence against Black people. I think it's got to end, and people are sick of it. All people are sick of it. And that would be my only thing to add to this, because this past week has just been really hard to watch as an American, hard to watch, knowing that it's been going on for as long as it has, and that Black lives have suffered for so long without a solution, without a long-term solution to saying, hey, this travesty has to stop. So I leave it at that.
John, well said. Thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in. Please check out the Psych Central podcast. If you like media like this, you can go over to PsyCentral.com/show. You can also go to PsyCentral.com/podcast and check out our other podcasts. And of course, and I have to say this because John is here, you should also just check out PsyCentral.com. It's pretty cool. We will see everybody next Friday at 1 Eastern. Bye.
Bye.